In 1998, a researcher asked strangers on the internet to describe any unexplained figures they had seen in their bedrooms at night. She expected a handful of responses. She received over 500. Every single one described the same thing: a tall, dark, featureless figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat. These people had never met. They lived in different countries, different time zones, different decades of their lives. A retired schoolteacher in Michigan, a teenager in rural Australia, a truck driver outside of Glasgow, a woman in Sao Paulo who had no idea anyone else had ever seen such a thing, described the same entity: solid black, no features, no face. Not a shadow cast by something else, something that stood on its own in the dark and cast no shadow of its own. Always tall, always watching, and always wearing that hat. Before we go any further, this is not a ghost story. This is not folklore invented around a campfire. The Hat Man is a documented cross-cultural phenomenon reported in peer-reviewed sleep research, in independent witness accounts going back decades, and in thousands of spontaneous reports from people who had never heard the name before they gave their own description. The earliest reliably documented reports stretch back to the 1970s. A woman in rural Ohio, she was 12 years old at the time, one night in the summer of 1970, to find a tall black figure standing beside her bed. She described it later as wearing a long coat and a broad hat. It did not breathe. It did not move, just watched her. She said she screamed. She said she heard herself scream. But her lips did not open. Her body did not move. She was pinned, she said, not physically, as if every muscle had simply decided to stop responding to her. The figure stayed for what she estimated was 3 to 4 minutes. Then it was simply gone. She told no one for 11 years. When she finally described it to her college roommate in 1983, the roommate went quiet. Then she said, "I have seen that exact thing. Same hat, same coat, same stillness." She had seen it for the first time in her own childhood bedroom in Tennessee in 1976. Shadow people have existed in reports for far longer. Across dozens of cultures, across centuries of documented tradition, there are figures described as dark human shapes that move at the edge of vision, seen in peripheral sight and gone the moment you turn to look directly. In Arabic tradition, they are called jinn. In Native American oral history, dark shapeless watchers are documented in accounts going back further than written record. But the Hat Man is different. Regular shadow people are vague, fleeting, peripheral. They are gone before you can focus on them. The Hat Man does not run. Man does not vanish when you look directly at him. He stands there and he lets you look, and witnesses consistently report one thing that separates him from every other dark figure in every other tradition. Not random darkness. Not passive absence. Witnesses describe a sensation they struggle to put into words, a targeted, focused, deliberate attention. The feeling is not that you stumbled across something. The feeling is that it came specifically for you. And it has been waiting. In 2001, a researcher named Heidi Hollis published the first book dedicated entirely to the Hat Man phenomenon. She had spent years collecting accounts, from people who sought her out after reading about the topic, but from people who described it before they knew the name existed. The consistency was, by her account, the thing that disturbed her most. Of witnesses. Dozens of countries. Accounts from children as young as 4 who could not yet read and had never been exposed to horror media. Accounts from elderly people in their 80s describing something they had seen 60 years earlier and never told anyone about. All describing a solid black figure. All describing the hat. Tell you about a specific case from 2003. A man named only as David in the published account, a 41-year-old electrician in Portland, Oregon, contacted a paranormal research group after an experience that had left him, in his own words, unable to sleep properly for 6 months. David reported that he had woken at approximately 3 in the morning. He was not startled awake, he simply opened his eyes. His wife was asleep beside him. The room was dark, and in the far corner, near the closet, something was standing. He described it as tall, taller than any person he had ever seen, perhaps 6.5 to 7 feet. Completely black. Not a man wearing black, something that was black all the way through, he said. The idea of a person rather than a person. And the hat was distinct, wide-brim flat crown, the kind he associated with old Western films or 1940s detective movies. He tried to wake his wife. He said he could move. This was not sleep paralysis as he understood it. He could turn his head. He could blink. simply could not make himself make a sound or reach across to her. Something in him, he said, was convinced on a level deeper than thought that making a sound would be a terrible mistake. He watched it for what he estimated was between 8 and 12 minutes. At no point did it move. At no point did it shift or waver or breathe. It simply stood there with what he could only describe as patience. The specific patience of something that has all the time in the world, because time means nothing to it at all. Then his wife shifted in her sleep. The movement snapped something loose in him. He lunged for the light switch. The room, flooded with light, was empty. His wife woke up. He did not tell her what he had seen. He did not tell her because he had no explanation. He was a practical man, he said. He did not believe in ghosts. He had never been interested in the paranormal. He had gone to bed that night after watching a football game and eating leftover pizza. There had been nothing unusual about the day at all. It saw him again 6 weeks later. Same corner. Same time. He had installed a night light in the bedroom after the first encounter, the kind that casts a faint orange glow just bright enough to see by. When he woke at 3 in the morning on that second occasion, the night light was enough to see the figure clearly. And this time, he said, he noticed something he had missed the first time. It was facing him. Not facing the room, not facing the wall, facing him specifically in the bed at the angle required to look directly at where he lay. Whatever it was looking at him, is where the phenomenon becomes genuinely difficult to dismiss. Sleep paralysis is the standard scientific explanation offered for all such encounters. During REM sleep, is temporarily paralyzed to prevent us acting out dreams. This is normal. Occasionally the mind wakes before the body catches up, leaving a person conscious but immobile. During these episodes, the brain frequently generates a perception of a presence in the room. This is documented. This is real. Is this? David was not paralyzed. He could move. He has described this carefully and repeatedly, and he is not alone. A significant portion of Hatman witnesses were fully mobile during their encounters, out of bed, standing in doorways, sitting in chairs, driving in cars. Whatever is happening to these witnesses, a portion of them cannot be explained by sleep paralysis at all. In June of 2006, a pair of truck drivers, both traveling the same stretch of Interstate 40 through New Mexico separately, 1 week apart, independently reported a black figure standing on the shoulder of the road. Both described a hat. One of them, a 50-year-old man from Albuquerque, pulled over and walked back to where he had seen it. There, no footprints in the sand, no crushed brush, nothing. Now I need to tell you about the children. This is the part of the Hat Man phenomenon that researchers find hardest to rationalize away. Because while adults can be dismissed, stress, hypnagogia, suggestion, the children are harder. Children as young as 3 and 4 years old have described the Hat Man. Children who cannot name what a fedora is have described the brim of the hat by shape, gesturing to its width with their hands. In 2012, a mother in suburban Denver posted on a parenting forum, not a paranormal forum, a parenting forum, asking if any other parents had experienced their child describing a man in a hat standing in their room at night. She had assumed it was an imaginary friend or a dream. 48 hours the thread had over 300 responses from parents across the United States. Every description matched. One response in particular stood out in that thread, a grandmother in North Carolina who described her granddaughter's account of the Hat Man. The child had named him. Without any prompting, without any prior exposure to the name or concept, this 4-year-old girl had called him Mr. Tall Hat. She said he came to watch her sleep. She said he was made of dark. She said he was made of dark. She said he had been there since before she could remember. And she said one more thing, she said he was different from the other ones. The other ones moved around. Tall Hat just watched. The other ones. This is the point where the wider shadow people phenomenon intersects with the Hat Man specifically. Because many, not all, but many, witnesses to the Hat Man also report other shadow figures. Smaller, faster, less defined, moving in peripheral vision, gone when looked at directly. The Hat Man is always different. The Hat Man never runs. There is a theory, not an official one, not a scientific one, but one that has emerged independently from dozens of witnesses who have attempted to make sense of their experiences, that the Hat Man is not the same kind of entity as the other shadow people. That he is something different in nature, something older, something that observes not just the people it visits but the other shadow figures too. Some witnesses describe him as seeming to be in charge of the others. Some describe the smaller shadow people as appearing to defer to him, moving around him, never through him, keeping a certain distance. One witness, a woman in her 50s from rural Tennessee who had seen shadow figures her entire life, described the Hat Man's arrival in her home one night as the moment the other figures stopped. All of them, at once. Like they knew something was coming and made room. There are rational frameworks people reach for. Mass suggestion, the idea that once a description exists online it spreads and contaminates accounts. But this does not explain the pre-internet cases. It does not explain the Ohio woman in 1972 who described it to no one for over a decade. It does not explain reports documented in academic literature from the 1950s. The internet did not create the Hat Man. The internet found him. The geographical spread is equally hard to explain. Shadow people and Hat Man accounts have been documented in Japan, in South Africa, in Argentina, in Finland, in India. Cultures with no shared mythology, no shared media, no shared language, producing descriptions of the same entity with the same hat, the same height, the same specific quality of watchful intent. There are those who approach the phenomenon from a psychological angle and propose that the Hat Man is an archetypal figure, a manifestation of the subconscious shadow self, as described by Carl Jung, externalized into a waking vision. The hat marks authority. The darkness marks the unknown. The watching posture marks judgment. This is a reasonable framework and some researchers find it useful. The problem with that framework is the same problem with all the frameworks. It explains why you might hallucinate a dark figure. It does not explain the hat. The hat is specific. The hat is consistent, is cross-cultural, cross-generational, and cross-linguistic. Jungian archetypes do not wear fedoras. 2017, an independent researcher compiled the largest known database of Hat Man accounts, just over 1,400 documented cases at the time of publication. She noted several consistent patterns beyond the appearance. First, the Hat Man almost never interacts with witnesses. He watches. Second, encounters cluster between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning. Third, a significant number of witnesses report seeing him during periods of high personal stress or transition, illness, bereavement, upheaval. Third pattern is the one that witnesses find hardest to dismiss, because it implies something more unsettling than random appearance. It implies timing. It implies he does not appear at random. It implies he appears when something in your life is already broken open, when you are, in some sense, more available. Available to what exactly is a question that nobody has been able to answer. Available to see something that is always there but usually invisible. Available to a predatory attention that selects for vulnerability. These are the questions that researchers ask in their published notes and then leave unanswered, because there is no data that resolves them. There is one final category of account that I want to bring to you before we reach the end of this. Because among the 1,400 plus documented cases, there is a small but persistent subset, perhaps 60 to 80 accounts in which something different happens, in which the Hat Man does not simply watch. He moves. These accounts describe the Hat Man stepping closer, slowly, without sound. They describe him reaching the bedside. They describe a sensation of pressure on the chest, on the shoulders, in the air. Several witnesses describe his face, or the place where a face should be, coming very close, close enough that they could see through him, that he was not fully solid. The darkness he was made of was deep, and that looking into it felt like looking down into something without a bottom. Single one of these close encounter witnesses survived with no physical harm, no marks, no injuries. Whatever happens when the Hat Man moves, it is not physical. But every one of them, in their accounts, describes the same aftermath. They were never the same about darkness after that. They could no longer stand in a dark room without checking the corners first. Some never fully slept in the dark again, is what we know. Thousands of people across 6 continents have independently reported the same entity. The reports predate the internet. The reports include children too young to have absorbed cultural suggestion. The reports come from people with no history of mental illness, no substance use, no prior interest in the paranormal. Paralysis explains some. It does not explain all. Nothing explains the hat. Is what we do not know. What it is, why it watches, why it wears a hat, where it goes when the light comes on. Whether it is always there in every dark corner of every room, and most of us simply never look directly at it. And whether it has ever stood in your corner. If you wake at 3 in the morning and the room feels different than it should, check the corners. And if something is there, standing still, wearing a hat, do not move, do not make a sound, because every witness who has ever seen the Hat Man has described the same ending. Eventually, he simply stops watching and leaves. No one knows where he goes.